Hey everyone, and welcome to our April live event for National Quilter Circle. We have a wonderful new guest with us this month, and Suan Guzman is here. Thank you so much for being here, Susan.
You're welcome. I'm really glad to be here.
We're glad to have you. So just in case somebody who's clicking in to see this event didn't read your bio that we posted on this link as well, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you kind of got into quilting.
Okay, sure. Probably, let's see, back in about 2004, I joined an online quilting guild, and I immediately started participating in their round robins, which was really fun. And I'm a self-taught quilter, and I kind of pushed myself each round robin group that I was involved with. I made sure that I sort of pushed myself to do new skills. So that was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that. So that's sort of how I got into quilting, and I just kind of fell in love with the whole designing and using right brain and left brain, figuring out yardages and doing the designs myself. I have a background in interior design, and I've always loved art and architecture, and so it just has kind of come naturally to me.
That's perfect. In case someone's wondering, what is a round robin?
A round robin, let's say there's 5 people that decide that they want to be in the round robin group. What you do is there are certain rules, but just basically you start your own block for the center of your quilt. So let's say I do an applique house. Then what I do is I send my applique house to the next person on the list. And then I get someone else's center block, whatever it is. And then I decide, what do I want to put around it? And when I go to send mine out, what I do is I take scraps from the center and I send that along with my block. And you send quite a bit because that will then travel to the next person. So 5 rounds later, after that last round that you put on someone else's quilt, you'll get your quilt back. And it was just really fun. It was a real fun way to get to know people in quilting, and you could be creative. So.
Absolutely. I think that's a really fun idea too. I don't know. I've never actually done one of those, but I think that would be a lot of fun, especially if you find that maybe you have a strength in something as far as maybe color and design, but somebody else has a totally different thought. It'll all kind of come together in the end with everybody's shared vision. I like that.
Yeah, there was one woman that I thought, and I still haven't done this yet, but there was one woman in our group who would make all of her rounds by hand. So she would go ahead and, cut up whatever her pieces are, and she would do everything by hand, even if it was just a plain pieced round that she did. And I've never done that before, and I would love to do that.
I've never done that either. I'm too impatient. I got to use the machine.
Yeah, I get that way too.
Yeah. So if anybody is just tuning in, watching, Susan is here. She is here to talk about actually an upcoming challenge we have going on as well, but also here to answer any of your quilting questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to just type those into the comment box below the video, and then we'll work our way through those for the next hour. But so like I mentioned, we have a challenge coming up, and if you've done our past challenges, we're definitely in for a treat with our new design that Susan's done, and that's going to start mid-May. So we will have more information out about that when it's actually going to start. If you've signed up for the previous ones, you're still signed up and you'll get all the information for it. To receive the information for the challenge, just sign up for the newsletter or join the NQC challenge Facebook page. But I know you're not going to show us the quilt, but maybe give us a little teaser about some of the things we're going to learn during this new challenge.
Well, I will tell the audience this, that we will be doing, if you want to go as far as making the quilt that we're going to be making along with it, the center is going to be on point. So sort of a medallion type quilt. I'm calling it a sampler. It's not a true, what we think of as a traditional sampler, but I'll get into explaining why I named it that a little bit later.
Perfect. Okay. And I have to say, I might have gotten a sneak preview and been able to make some of the blocks, and it's definitely a lot of fun.
And she did a great job.
Thank you.
Awesome.
We have a question here. Deb wants to know, will the challenge be free again this time? And the answer is yes. So the challenge is always free. So Susan has designed this quilt for us and done the pattern and all the information that you need to complete the blocks, the quilt, the layout, everything. And then she'll be posting that every week, and National Quilter Circle will be posting that every week. And all of that is free. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So just speaking of some quilts, I noticed you have one behind you, and I wanted to know if you made it and sort of what your inspiration behind it was.
Okay. Yes, I did. As a matter of fact, I made it, I think it was 2014, 15, 13, 14, right in there. And it was made for McCall's Quilting. It was one of their special issues. And what I did was I based it off of a quilt that a quilt top that I bought at a vintage store. And it's a vintage layout of the same pattern, which is called Lover's Knot. And I do love the top is really cool. But what I wanted to do was use a variety of art gallery fabrics. So that's what I used in this one, along with their solids. And their colors are just so gorgeous. They're just so saturated. And they were really fun to work with. But anyway, I redesigned the quilt as far as coloring is concerned. And it was published along with a photo of the vintage quilt that I have.
Perfect. We have another question that just came in, but you did mention a lot about color. And I know we've talked about this in the past, that different designers and different quilters have different ways of looking at color and putting color together. So obviously that one behind you has a lot of color. So oh, yeah. How do you put that together without it becoming overwhelming or too much color?
Well, I love scrappy quilts. And I started in the business designing quilts for fabric companies using their collections. So I've kind of gotten used to working with a variety of prints and color. And how I color my quilts, I actually use EQ. And how do I say this? I sort of break down my favorite fabrics out of collections, or I might take them from a couple of different collections, and I will place odd number of, let's say, fabric number 1. I'll place odd number of fabric number 1 in certain places in my quilt design. And I have like a certain method that I do, and I explain it in my book actually, on how I color. But as far as making it not look too, I don't know, like too much, I think it's all in balancing, in this one in particular, balancing solids with the prints. And you don't want, and depending on the size of the cuts that you're making, you don't want the prints to be too big. You know, smaller prints just kind of work a little better.
Perfect. Okay, I have a question here. This came in from Alma, and she says that she has started quilting and really enjoys it, and bought some quilting measuring blocks and realized that the first 10 blocks she made were a ½ inch too small. She was wondering if there was a way to save them. Could she make a border to make the block bigger, or is there another way that she can fix her problem?
Well, I guess I'd have to see the pattern, but one thing that you could do is add borders to your blocks and kind of change it up that way. Trying to think what else. Turn the project into something else. I wonder if Alma was able to find out why, you know, just double check your seam allowances. So that helps for the next block that you make from that pattern.
Absolutely, to make sure that you're not, that all of your future blocks aren't also going to be a ½ inch too small as well. Exactly. What about, could you then just go ahead and piece all of your blocks together knowing that they're too small, and then maybe add thicker borders around the outside edge or something like that? Yeah,
that's a great idea. Yeah, just continue making them as you're making them. And yeah, just add some extra borders, or even add sashing. That would work too.
Perfect. in case Alma hasn't gotten into what sashing, or if someone else is a beginner out there and has only made maybe blocks, what is sashing?
Sashing is the strips of fabric that you see in certain quilt designs that separate the blocks. So you might have, say, like a 1-inch sashing strip, and the sashing strip is as long as your block. And you sew those together all into rows, and in between the blocks, so the sashing strip is as long as your block, you would have a cornerstone, and that helps with the spacing between the blocks when you go to lay it all out. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, yeah. Well, and if it doesn't, we can definitely post a picture or something like that on the Facebook page too. So if you need a visual reference, we can absolutely do that. Our next question here, this is from Connie, and she wants to know, are there any resources, books, or websites other than National Quilter Circle that you'd recommend for a beginning quilter?
Yes, absolutely. And actually it's on my, I see it over there on my bookcase. I have always loved, and I picked this up early on, the Complete Guide to Quilting, and it's by Better Homes and Gardens. I love that book. It just has everything in it, and I taught myself a lot just using that book. And in addition to that, just so you know, there's also charts in there for a variety of making, setting triangles. And I can get into or show examples of that on below when we're finished today.
Perfect. And just because you are self-taught, but you also have, you know, written books, you have worked for magazines, you have a blog, you have all that. So, I mean, just following quilters like you is a good way to learn. Learn from other people as well. So I feel like that's definitely something to do.
Yeah, definitely. Yep.
Perfect. All right. Our next question here, this is from Flora. And she says that she's making a wedding quilt for her best friend and is worried about it being too warm. It's going to have a flannel backing. Would fleece be a better batting, or is there a lightweight batting that would work best? Or do you have any other ideas?
Well, actually, I mean, fleece definitely works. I've used flannel as batting, not just the backing, but for the batting. Of course, flannel, you know, is kind of on the warm side for a backing. So if you want to keep it on the cool side, I probably recommend that you not use flannel on the back. Just use 100% cotton. And then the other thing is there's so many battings out today that are thin and they're very breathable. So I wouldn't shy away from using a really nice cotton batting.
Absolutely. I have to just point this out because I just actually did a video, which should be up on the site soon, but on different types of batting. And I got to play around with some bamboo batting, and that might be my new favorite thing. It is the softest, nicest feeling. I almost didn't want to put it between 2 layers of fabric. Like it is so nice. So if you can get your hands on some of that.
I always forget about bamboo batting, but it is really beautiful to work with. It's wonderful. Like if you are a quilter, you actually quilt your layers together. It's wonderful to work with. It's like your needle goes through butter. It's just, in the drapeability is really nice too.
Yes, absolutely. All right, we plugged our bamboo batting. Okay. Move on.
Yes,
all right, our next question. This is from Simone, and she says, do I need a walking foot to stitch in the ditch? And is there a way to do it without a walking foot?
Well, you can do it without a walking foot, certainly. I think it's the reason why most quilters and companies suggest that you use a walking foot is that your feed dogs work along with the walking foot to pull the fabric, the 3 layers together at the same time. So it just kind of keeps everything a lot more stable and even, but you can certainly do it without.
I just have to point this out because I actually got this customer service question the other day about, I don't know, Janome makes one for sure, and I don't know of any other brands, but they make a stitch in the ditch foot, walking foot combination. So it has that fin that you need for the stitch in the ditch, but it's also a walking foot too. So I don't know if there's universal versions, but I know there's at least one out there somewhere.
Well, I'll have to look and see what that looks like. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. I think it would definitely make it easier.
Mm-hmm.
All right, next question here. Deb wants to know, is there an easy way to get strips to line up right?
Easy way to get strips to line up right. I guess I don't really quite understand. Maybe borders, do you think? Maybe
Either borders or, Deb, if you're watching, if you can maybe give us clarification on what kind of strips. I'm, in my mind, picturing like a rail fence quilt, but kind of not done the rail fence way, but done to like strips actually line up maybe.
Yeah. You know, that's funny because I've experienced that myself when I do, or even like improvisational quilting, and I just sew a bunch of strips together. I do notice that if I sew the first 2 strips together, even if I sew 3 together, what you want to do is take your unit and flip it and then add your next one. And then you tend to even out a lot easier. The other thing is when you're making those, make your strips a little bit longer so you can even trim them out.
Okay, we just got a follow-up. Deb said for the sashing.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Let's see. So what was the
any easy way to get strips for the stashing to line up right?
Okay. One thing to do is okay. So the center of your quilt, fold that in half so that you have a crease along the edge that you're going to be sewing to. So you know exactly where the center is. Then what you want to do is take your long strip, your border strip, fold that in half as well, finger press it, and then that's your center meeting point. From there, I would pin each end and then just sort of work your way to the center from those 2 endpoints. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, and then actually just touch again on those corner stones, because that's one way to also make sure that your sashing is lined up right within the block, because you have underneath the block the cornerstone. Is that how those work?
Yeah, the cornerstone seam can line up with the seam that or I'm sorry, the edge that you're sewing to. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. All right, our next question here, this is from Leslie, and she says, how do you prefer to clean your iron when residue appears? Mine is brand new and I'm really new to irons, so I'm lost.
Oh, okay. And I'm assuming you mean the plate of your iron?
I would, yeah.
You know what, you can actually, of course, unplug it and make sure it's cool. But just take soap and water is fine. And I would just sort of lean the face plate sort of at an angle like this and then wash it this way and just wipe it clean with like I don't know, like a damp paper towel or something like that. But just a little bit of soap and water brings that right off.
Would that work too? So I've been doing a lot of work with fusibles lately. Say I got some fusible or something on my iron. How would I get that off?
That's a really good question. I would probably try, I mean, I've never really had any issues with that, but I would probably try maybe even Goo Gone. That would work.
Mm-hmm. That might work too, yeah.
And then after using it, I would probably wash it, you know.
Yeah. I don't know what that would do once you heat it up.
Yeah, because the Goo Gone has like oils in it.
Yes, perfect. All right, our next question here. This is from Sally, and she says, I am almost finished with a quilt that is maroon and white. I didn't pre-wash the fabric. I realize I probably should have about a third of the way through, and am worried about the maroon bleeding onto the white. What is the best color catcher to use when I wash for the first time?
That is, Ashley and I were just talking about this the other day.
We had a long conversation about this.
Yes. Yeah. I'm sure people will be cringing out there, but I've been not pre-washing my fabrics from day one. I'm kind of impatient and I like to get right to whatever I'm working on. Then in addition to that, a lot of times the projects that I'm working on, I have such a tight deadline that I don't have time to wash them. And I've honestly never had a problem with reds. The colors in today's fabrics, they don't bleed like they used to. However, like you had mentioned, there are certain color catchers. I don't know what those are, though. I honestly don't know. But what we'll do is we'll go ahead and research that and put those within the thread below the video.
Absolutely. And I know we have a video. I actually believe it might be on our sister site, National Sewing Circle. But we do go over the little color catchers. They almost look like dryer sheets that you can just throw in when you're drying it. And I know if anybody is watching and has watched maybe previous months where we've had Heather Thomas, she definitely always uses her Synthropol. So there are things like that where you can add those right in with the wash. So there's definitely some options.
What was it that Heather uses?
Synthropol. So it's something you can add into when you're washing it.
Oh, okay.
And it makes it so the colors don't. If the maroon were to bleed, it wouldn't actually soak into the white. So there are things like that that you can use also.
Excellent.
But both Susan and I don't pre-wash our fabric, and so far, knock on wood, we've both been okay.
Yeah. One other point there, Ashley, and I was telling Ashley about this as well. There was a quilt that I designed using fabrics by Wyndham, and there was one fabric that they didn't have in the States yet, and it was crucial to the design. And what they ended up doing was they ended up digitally printing that fabric. And they told me, do not wash that quilt because you will not see the pattern any longer and it'll bleed and it was going to be a mess. So several years after I made that quilt, I ended up washing it. I thought, you know what, I'm just going to try it. And it has reds in it and some gold and light cream. And I had no problems. It looks great.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So, yeah, absolutely. All right, our next question here, this is from Donna, and she says that she just made a broken star quilt, and at the point of the star, the material is thick, which makes the quilting hard. How can I prevent from having these thick areas?
During your pressing, what you want to do is press those seams open. So for instance, if you know what I'm saying when I talk about a pinwheel block, and if you're familiar with that, in the center, there's so many different pieces that come together and it does get very, very thick right there. If you start getting into the habit of sort of looking at your block as you're making it, and if there aren't instructions already within the pattern to guide you in opening up those seams, just kind of think that through. Like if you see too many pieces of fabrics coming together in a central area, you want to press those seams open.
Perfect. And just because it's been, like 20 minutes and I haven't talked about our upcoming quilt challenge, I'm going to plug that again because I mentioned that I did get to make some of these blocks ahead of time. And that is something that you provide with this pattern is cutting instructions, piecing instructions, pressing instructions, everything that goes along with it. And that's definitely very helpful if you're not familiar with a certain block to be able to know whether you need to press those open or to one side or the other. So look forward to pressing instructions if you sign up for our next National Quilter Circle Quilt Block Challenge, which will start the middle of next month.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Our next question here, this is from Elisa. Do you have any absolutely necessary tips on binding?
Necessary.
What is something you always do when you're binding a quilt?
Well, I'll tell you this. I love putting binding on quilts. I love sitting in front of the TV, stitching it onto the back. One thing that I've had to do, though, for many years is to put binding on fast. And so one tip is, of course, you sew it onto the back and bring it over the layers onto the front. And I would stitch it with my sewing machine. And how I would do that is just 1 or 2 threads in on the edge of that binding that meets your quilt. Can you see that? How I'm
Yep.
Just a couple of threads in is where I stitch, and just take it slow. If you care to say you're doing a baby quilt and you need to get it out right away. That's a really good way to do it. And then as far as when I just make the binding itself, I've been using 2.5-inch strips, but you know what? At one time I did 2.25-inch strips, and I think I'm going to go back to that. I just think that there's too much space in between, you know, that covers
the edge of the quilt and where it.
Yeah, the edge, right. And I think I'm going to go back to 2.25-inch strips.
So if you're sewing it by machine, you sew to the back first and wrap to the front. But if you're going to sew it by hand, you do the opposite?
Right, exactly. So you have a really nice finished edge and you don't have any stitching.
Perfect.
No stitching shows.
And just so I can plug a couple of videos that are currently on our site, we have actually quite a few videos on attaching bindings, both by machine and by hand, where we actually show some of the instructors that we have preferred hand stitches for actually blind stitching that binding in place, so you don't see any of the stitching, which makes it look very nice and professionally finished. Perfect. All right, our next question here, Simone says she has another question. How precise do you need to be with the cutting? In YouTube tutorials, everyone seems to cut so fast without being careful about the precision.
I think it is very important to be very accurate. I'm going to tell you a little secret. I guess kind of my dirty little secret about how I cut. I actually use the cutting mat to cut from. I use my ruler, of course, on top, but I use the cutting mat to line my fabrics up when I go to cut. And I know some people don't do that, or they think that that's taboo, but that's just kind of how I started, and I can't switch, and I don't think there's really any right or wrong way personally. But I really think that cutting is super important to be exact.
For sure. And just to mention another video we have on the site also is one that talks about cutting and how it doesn't matter necessarily, like you said, which one you base it off of, the ruler or the cutting mat, just be consistent in what you do. I actually do a little bit of both because my cutting mat is so old that some of the lines, you can't see them anymore. So I have to use my ruler there. But I mean, I should probably just get a new one. All right. Charlotte wants to know, what is the difference between ironing and pressing? Is it pressure? Is it motion? No one I watch on the interwebs seems to be doing anything different than what I've done when I iron.
Well, ironing is the motion of going back and forth. And pressing is actually what it describes is taking your iron and just putting it down on your fabric and then picking it up and moving it. Personally, when I press, I sort of jiggle the iron a little bit, and then I pull it up, and then I press it down and jiggle again. That's sort of the technique that I use.
So why would you want to not iron if you're say you just sewn two pieces together in a block? Why would you press instead of iron?
Well, you press because if you iron, your fibers, if you haven't pre-starched your fabrics, there can be a lot of movement within the weft and warp of your fabric itself. So it can distort your block sizes.
Okay, perfect. And now, so we're going to talk about the challenge again, just because I like to give little hints about it, because you've already mentioned that the center is on point, which means there are going to be some kind of bias cut edges. And so you're also going to be giving tips on how to work with that. And what is it that makes that so tricky?
Oh, with the bias edges? Yeah, you have to be very careful in how you handle bias edges, because just take a small piece of fabric, cut it on the diagonal, and just play around with it yourself if you've never done so. And you can see that it can just completely open up, like almost like a flower, and completely distort your fabrics. So I always like to say you need to treat the biased edges with kid gloves and just be very, very gentle and try not to stretch in any way.
Perfect. All right, next question here. This is from Irene. She says she is new to quilting and has a question about borders. I will have to piece the border, but don't know where to position the seam. Should the seams be centered or offset? Should they mirror each other?
I guess I'm not quite understanding the question.
So say your quilt is 88 inches and you need a border and you're going to need to piece together 2 strips. Where would you put the seam?
I see what you're saying. Okay. As a matter of fact, there are going to be some borders in the challenge. Ashley, were you going to say that?
I was.
Where I do instruct you to piece many strips, and then from there you're going to cut your strips down. So for the most part, you need to consider what your print is. So for instance, if you have a border that's going to be a stripe, and the stripe is going to come into the center of the quilt, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. What I did actually with my quilt, and I did use a stripe, I just butted it up against each other and tried to line it up so that it looked like the stripe was consistent. However, you can, I used the same stripe on my binding, and I used the diagonal seams on the binding, and you really can't even tell. So I guess to answer your question, I would add up all the sides of your border, and then I would just cut your strips from there. And don't even worry about where the piecing is.
Yes, I agree. I also pieced mine, and mine is not a stripe or a print. It's all just solid fabric, and I didn't even think about where the seam was going to go. And I have taken pictures of the quilts. I have shown people, and nobody has pointed out, oh, I can see your border seams. So definitely, even once the quilting is done on it, I don't think you'll be able to even really tell where those seams are.
That's exactly what I was going to point out. I'm glad you said that, Ashley, because sure, once quilting is done on the top, you're not even going to see the seam where it lays within your border.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Amy wants to know, when finishing a quilt, I have really only done stitch in the ditch with straight lines. I want to start finishing with different designs, but my fear is that the fabric pulling or warping, throwing the lines off. I baste with pins. Is fabric movement an issue, or are there any tips for maintaining the lines?
Well, one thing that I do is I personally try to shy away from just pins, pinning the quilt sandwich together. What I like to do is I like to use the spray basting that you can get like at Joann's. That way I know nothing's going to shift. So you use that, you spray it, and I think the instructions are on the spray can itself, but you spray your batting. You want to spray the batting, the top part of your batting to put your top onto, and then the back side of your batting, so flip it over, back side of your batting, you want to spray that, and then add your backing.
Absolutely. So I just realized that this was a product. I've never used it before, but fusible batting is a thing. Have you ever used it? Or do you have any? Yeah, where it actually is a batting that comes with.
Yeah, you know what? No, I've never used it.
Okay.
I have not. Have you?
I haven't. I didn't even know it existed until about a month or so ago. So, I mean, that could be something you could use too.
Yeah, you could.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just never used it before, so I couldn't recommend it.
Okay. Yeah. Well, we'll say if you don't have any basting spray and you can find some fusible batting, give it a try and see if it works.
Or add extra pins. I mean,
yes.
Yeah.
Side question: what do you use to baste pins? We have a lot of instructors that use straight pins. I used to always use those curved safety pins. What is your preferred pin basting method?
Well, that's what I use is the safety pins, the curved safety pins. I found I have used straight pins and I just poke myself too much. So I'm not allowed to have straight pins.
Fair enough. I like the safety pins also, just because I am one who will finish a quilt top. I'll get it all basted and I'll say I'm going to quilt it, and it sits there for a little while. So I want to make sure that my pins stay in place. So I like the safety pins for sure.
There you go. Yeah.
All right. Gloria wants some recommendations. She says, what is a good gift for a quilting friend that's around $20? Is fabric too personal? A pattern seems too presumptuous. Scissors are boring. Do you have any good ideas?
Oh gosh. I know that I actually have a friend who makes sewing jewelry, and if anybody is interested, I'd be happy to share her site. She has an Etsy shop. She might even be listening. She said that she was interested in maybe joining. So I would say, sewing jewelry is kind of fun. If they collect the pins, that you get at different shows. Sewing themed pins would be a neat little gift. Maybe even taking fat quarters from your stash, cutting your yardage, and personalizing it. And I've taken vintage bias tape that I've found, and I've used that for my bow. And you can use fabric for your bow to tie it all together, just to sort of personalize it a little bit. Gosh, I'm trying to think what else I've given for quilting gifts.
Well, I'm just going to point out that I don't think scissors are boring. Like, I think scissors, especially if they're a good quality fabric scissor, like, I would love to get that. So I don't think.
Right. Yeah. I know. You can't have enough, even the small little ones that you keep next to the sewing machine. Mm-hmm. They usually end up behind me on my cutting table for some reason, and then I'm like stretching to get them. But it's nice to have a couple of pair right close by. Yeah. But even something like carry-all that I have that you can put all your scissors in, or like your seam ripper in. I have that sitting on my cutting table, but I also have one right next to my sewing machine as well. So that's kind of a nice thing too.
All sorts of fun gifts. See, now you're just going to have to extend your budget from 20 and do like 5 different gifts now.
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
Right. Brenda says, what is the name of the quilt pattern of the quilt on the back of your couch? This may have already been asked, but I just joined. So
it's called Lover's Knot, and I made it for McCall's Quilting for one of their special issues. It was one of their vintage was in the title, and you still might be able to get it off of their website. I'm not really sure. I've thought about making my own pattern based off of it as well. So maybe in the future, if there's enough interest, I'll put that together.
Is it complicated? I see some curved.
It is curved. Yeah, it is. I mean, you need to take it very slow. If you're a beginner or intermediate quilter, I would just take it a little slow with the curves.
Perfect. That's the one thing. The very first quilt I ever made had Y seams and curved seams, and when I talk to a quilter, they say, "Oh, that was so complicated." But my background is sewing, so for me, I was like, "Well, that's just like an arm's eye in a shirt or something." So if you have a sewing background, don't shy away from something that maybe a quilter considers complicated, because it might be more up your alley than you think it is.
That's so true. And the other thing, I'd like to add to that is, if a pattern does say that somewhere that it's intermediate, just if you really want to make that quilt, make it, and just take your time. That's really the key to your success, is to just take your time doing it. Take your time sewing. Don't rush it. Make sure that your seams are 1/4 inch. Quite frankly, when I sew, I do I don't do a full 1/4 inch seam. I do a little bit scant. So, and everything always goes together for me.
Perfect. And scant is?
Just a little bit less, like a thread or two less than a 1/4 inch.
Perfect. And just to point out too, like I said, if something maybe you think is beyond your skill level, whether you're going to ask questions to the pattern designer, whoever you bought that pattern from, online forums, us at National Quilter Circle, there are so many people out there that can answer your questions if you run into a snag. That absolutely pick a quilt and make it.
Yeah, quilters are just so friendly and helpful. It's just such a great community, and everybody's always willing to help each other.
Yes, for sure. All right, our next question here, this is from Suzanne. When you start quilting, should you start from the center of the quilt top and work your way from side to side?
Actually, yes. Yeah, that's exactly how you should do it. Let's say you're doing a stitch in the ditch. Start in the center, go out one way. So say start in the center and go right. And then your next stitching should start in the center and go left. And then you want to build out from there, north and south of your quilt.
So that's obviously for quilting, say on your standard conventional machine, right? So long arm would be totally different.
Absolutely, because long arming, there's a lot of prep work to secure the layers together. And you know what, I'm saying that, and I'm not positive. I really should. Maybe I'm assuming too much. Yeah, maybe one of our quilters out there can leave something within the comments below and just give
how long arm quilting goes.
That would be great. Yeah.
Perfect. I know that I look at the long arm machines and I think I have room for that in my sewing room. I should get one of those, and then they're just totally intimidating to me. So I've yet to try one. All right, our next question here. Kathy wants to know, how do you get a good corner on your binding? Does the size matter?
Does the size? I'm
the width. I'm gonna say the width of the binding. Does that, make it easier to get a better corner or not?
No, not necessarily. No, I don't. Personally, I don't think so. What you want to do is when you're coming up to a corner, you want to stop a 1/4 inch away from the edge and back stitch. And then you want to cut your threads, rotate your quilt, arrange the corner. And what I do is I start, my 1/4 inch seam right on the edge, and I back stitch there as well. That way it's so secure, and I don't have to do that extra, like after, or I guess I should say while I'm doing the attaching the binding to the back, if I'm hand stitching it. Some people go up into that corner and stitch that down. I never do, because I do all of that securing with my sewing machine, and I've never had a problem with it.
Absolutely. The one thing when I'm doing mine, rather than stop at a 1/4 inch, I still stop there, but then I actually stitch out to the corner and go off that point, because I feel like it helps me when I'm actually folding it up. So I'm not just kind of guessing, okay, is this a 45 degree? I know that my stitching was 45. And so I found that kind of helps too. So maybe doing a combination of both might work. So
actually, that's a really great tip.
Well, hopefully it works for somebody else other than me. Maybe it's just my little thing. I don't know. But I think it works wonderfully.
Excellent.
All right. We have another question from Simone. And she says, what do you think about putting 2 layers of batting together? Is it a good idea?
Putting 2 layers of batting together before you put the top and the backing? If you like that extra loft, I don't think that there's any problems with it. If I were doing that personally, I would probably base those 2 layers together, like spray base those together, just so that they didn't shift. So, but yeah, I don't think there would be anything wrong with that.
Do you think there's a bigger difference between 2 layers of low loft batting together versus high loft batting? Would one be stiffer? Would there be a pro or con to picking just high loft batting as opposed to putting some together?
No, I'm just wondering if, it's funny. I just use the same size all the time. I use pretty thin batting. I've never really used anything really thick. I don't think there would really be much of a difference. I wouldn't think. But
I wouldn't think so either. One thing you could do is, because I know you can go to the fabric store or wherever and get really small pieces of batting or even just crib sized and just, you know, maybe cut a couple layers and put them together and see if you like the look and feel of it.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Perfect. All right. Rose wants to know, when doing applique, what are the best iron-on stabilizers?
Oh, best iron-on stabilizers. Oh gosh. I use the Pellon product line. I'm just trying to think. I guess it just depends on, I'm thinking that you're talking maybe raw edge and then attaching that to your base fabric and then stitching around. I just always use Pellon, the Pellon products. So
I did too, and I use Wonder Under, and I'm not even sure if that's a Pellon product or if it's.
You know what? Yeah, I use that as well. And
okay,
I'm thinking it is, but I don't know.
I don't either. Yeah. I know. I just know I've always called it Wonder Under, and then one time along the way somebody corrected me and told me it's fusible web, you know, and Wonder Under is the brand name, like Kleenex kind of thing. But that's just the only one I've ever used, and it works wonderfully.
It's been so long since I've done applique, and I love applique. I really enjoy doing it. Just recently, I started using a product by a designer out of Australia, and I apologize, I don't remember the name of it offhand, but I'm really enjoying using it. And it's a really great product to use, and she uses it along with glues. So I can also add that below.
Perfect. Okay. And then the second part to that question, what is a good stabilizer for stabilizing t-shirts or t-shirt quilts?
You know, I really don't have never made a t-shirt quilt, so I'm really not sure. What I would do is I would recommend either do a Google search or like if you go to Joann's, ask one of the ladies behind the counter to recommend a product. And I apologize. I just have never used anything like that.
No, that's fine. I had to ask it because I had the answer already planned, and that, you know, I'm going to plug a video that we have on our site. So we actually have a class on how to make t-shirt quilts. We also have another short video on like prepping t-shirts and things like baby onesies and stuff for making quilts out of that, and also an article. So we have all of that information on the site too. So if you want to look there, you can. Tracy says, thank you for sharing your wisdom. I made a quilt where I pressed the seams open to reduce the bulk. Can I stitch in the ditch if there is no ditch? Or will that weaken the threads in the piecing?
That is such a good question. Actually, I used to press all of my seams open, and my quilter got so mad at me because she said, I do stitch in the ditch before I do whatever pretty quilting she does. And so I stopped doing that. So I would say, I mean, perhaps go a thread or two onto one of the sides to secure that. I would probably recommend that if you're concerned about your open seams, because you're absolutely right. Yeah, you're really, all you're doing is you're stitching down the stitches to the batting. So
right. So I guess if whatever, I don't know what this quilt pattern is that Tracy made, but if you always lean towards stitch in the ditch quilting because you either are not confident in your quilting and you want your quilting to be somewhat hidden, what is an easy form of quilting, whether it's a pattern or a style, that you would start with if you're just venturing into quilting beyond stitch in the ditch?
Yeah, I would say either echo quilting, so you can echo shapes. So if you have a triangle, you can stitch inside the triangle and outside the triangle, say like 1/4 of an inch. You can do straight lines. That's probably what I would recommend.
Yep, perfect. All right. Jolene says, is hand sewing binding better than machine binding? Is one better than the other?
Well, when you think about hand stitching, well, at least how I do it, my stitches are wider apart than if I were to attach it using my sewing machine. I personally like the look better. And again, I like the journey. I I just really enjoy doing hand stitching. So I prefer that. But you definitely are going to have more security if you use your sewing machine.
Yes, absolutely. So I would say just base your binding attachment method as to who's going to use that quilt and how often it's going to be laundered or washed.
Right, exactly.
Christine wants to know, where do you buy your fabrics?
Where do I buy my fabrics? Actually, I get most of my fabrics from fabric companies, and I get them before they're in stores. So when I design a quilt, I put a request into the fabric companies because I'm promoting their fabrics for them in my patterns. And so they usually send me whatever I need for my projects. When I do go shopping, I sometimes buy online, but I really like to frequent the local quilt shops and make a journey out of it. For instance, I live in the suburbs of Denver, and I might like to drive down to Colorado Springs, which is about 40-minute drive, and just make a day of it, and just, you know, maybe with a girlfriend or even by myself. So that's usually what I do.
We're going to set up like a fabric buying date soon.
Yeah.
We're going to, yeah.
Yeah.
But so I also want to point out, because I have local quilt shops where I'm at. I'm in northern Colorado, but I also have a Joann Fabrics, and I buy a lot of stuff there too. And there are brands that you can find in quilt shops that are also in bigger box stores like that. So, I mean, is there anything against buying fabric from a bigger name retailer like that?
You know what? I personally don't have a problem. I know that some people they really would prefer not to use, say, like Joann's brand fabrics. They are a different quality. They may be, you know, just, you can do a field test. Like take a piece of fabric or a fat quarter with you to Joann's and just feel the fabric. It's not as thick. The weave isn't as tight typically, but they are improving too. I've seen some improvements even in their Joann brand fabrics, but I personally don't have a problem with them. I actually, if I like the print, I'm going to use it. And then in addition to that, there's some designers that are designing for companies such as Denise Schmidt. She actually designs for Free Spirit, but she also designs for, and I apologize, I don't remember the other company, but you'll see her fabrics in Joann Fabrics as well.
Absolutely. And I have to say, one of my favorite fabric designers, he used to do paper crafting. So Tim Holtz did all sorts of paper crafting design, and I absolutely love all of his designs. They're very, well, they're called eclectic elements, and so they're all very busy and exciting. And so, yeah, like you said, there are lots of fun designers out there who are designing lines for more accessible fabric buying locations.
Yeah. And the nice thing about Joann's is that there's coupons that you can use.
Always coupons.
How about that?
Me too. I got them on my phone. I got the printed versions. I come in with like 3 different kinds.
That's great.
All right, Josie wants to know, why does my needle get stuck in the same spot when I'm piecing together 2 blocks? Is there a way to avoid this? It's really frustrating and happens randomly.
It gets stuck in the same spot.
I'm not quite sure where that spot would be. I guess if you had any kind of needle issues when you're piecing a block.
Yeah, that could be. It could be that you need to change your needle. It could be that maybe the tension is off with your thread. That could possibly be a factor. What I would recommend is that whoever you bought your sewing machine from, if it is a sewing machine shop, I would contact them and just let them know what's happening, because they may have a solution for you that's specific to that brand of sewing machine.
Yes.
However, I'm thinking, you know, if it's a sewing machine like, for instance, a Brother machine that you bought at Walmart, I would say maybe look through the literature that you got with your machine and see if there's a customer service number and maybe give them a call.
Since personally my machine is a brother machine that I bought at Walmart back when I was in college, and it's still my go-to, my favorite machine, works perfectly.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yes. They do have in the manual, it's a customer care number, and you can call that too. So
cool.
Just, you know, Walmart machines are awesome too.
Yeah, they are. And you know what? I bought my first sewing machine from Walmart when I started quilting, and I burned out 2 of the same because I was sewing so much. I burned out 2 of them. I bought a second one because the stitches were so beautiful. I just loved it. The only thing because I was doing so much bulk, I needed a heavier sewing machine because I just ran that thing to the ground.
Perfect. It's good to know that they hold up though and that they last.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, Steph wants to know, can anyone help me figure out why my bias tape is always puckering? It's not as bad when I machine stitch, but it still looks messy. What am I doing wrong?
When your bias tape, I wonder how that's being used.
I'm wondering if she's trying to attach bias tape to a straight edge and is maybe pulling it too much, and it is bias tape, so it is going to stretch.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I would just say whenever you hear the word bias, just be very gentle. Don't overstretch when you go to pin it to whatever your surface is. As you're sewing, I would recommend take a couple of pins out ahead of time and just gently lay and maybe smooth the bias tape towards you as you sew. And that could maybe help stabilize a little bit better.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Brenda wants to know, what type of quilting do you do? Do you have a long arm or a domestic machine? Do you do free motion versus walking foot?
I don't.
You don't do any?
No, it's not across the board. I don't. I do some quilting myself. I was frightened to try to quilt my quilts together, but I sort of pushed myself a few years ago, and actually I ended up sewing my quilt for my friend, and I sort of just did different techniques on my own, and I did end up. It looks like I may have lost you. Did I lose? It's 7 o'clock. I'm not really sure if anybody's out there. Did I lose you, Ashley?
Hi, everybody. I'm Sam. I'm normally behind the scenes, but we apparently lost.
Oh, there she is.
We lost Ashley, and now you're going to lose me again.
Oh, okay. Ashley, are you back?
I'm here. I can hear and see you.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I would say
it was a dark.
You went black, and I had an error up there.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, so I missed the end of your response as to what type of quilting you do.
Oh, okay, yeah. So I just started doing some meandering, and I'm actually kind of enjoying it. I haven't done it in a while since I did that project about a year or so ago. But I started doing meandering, and I do straight stitch. And that's probably the extent. And then some sort of geometric, just willy-nilly, sort of squared off rectangular type shapes, and just try it. Just put together even like a square of backing and top solids, and just sort of play around a little bit. So that's sort of what I've done, but I apologize. I wish I could answer that better.
No, I think that's a good thing for people to know, is that you can be a designer, you can be amazing at putting quilts together, and you don't have to feel like you always have to quilt your own quilts. You can send them to someone else and they can do that also. But just to plug another video we have on the site, we do have videos on how you can put together sort of stitch practice pages, and you can practice designs. We also have a video on some of the common quilting motifs, if you will, to start practicing first, whether those are loop-de-loos or L's or E's or however you want to say them, things you can practice with free motion. So we have a lot of different options there. But we are at our hour. So I want to thank you so much for being here to talk about quilting and answer all of our quilting questions.
Oh, absolutely. Ashley, this was a lot of fun. And thank you so much, everyone, for having me and for all of your great questions. This was a lot of fun.
Absolutely. And we're definitely going to see
I hope I see
Susan.
a lot of you. Yeah, a lot of you join the challenge with us.
Yes. So, and we'll post more information about that as well as talk about it again in next month's live event, because our challenge will be starting in the middle of next month. You can get more information about that on our website as well as on the NQC Quilt Block Challenge Facebook page. So we hope to see all of you there, and we will see you all again next month. Have a good night.